The new update in Palworld made a lot of changes that completely alter how you should set up your base. In today's video, I'm going to cover all of these changes in detail and explain how you can design your bases to take advantage of the new update. I'll then showcase my favorite base location in the game, which is even better now that the update has been released. In the background, I'll show you my process of updating my base, which I built applying the information I give in this video. I'll almost certainly miss something due to there being so much to cover on this topic, so I'll leave a pinned comment below with any corrections or additions to the information that I find after this video is already out. Without further ado, let's get into it. Palworld made a lot of changes to how bases function. Here's a quick list of every change. You can now select which work suitabilities a PAL will and will not focus on with the PAL monitoring stand. Filter chests to only intake certain types of items, allow automatic transporting from any workstation, and there is now more leeway with build placement restrictions. They also added new ore mining stations, which are incredibly overpowered and a must-have. The addition of ore mining stations completely changes the entire meta for where your base should be set up, because the necessity of being near metal ore is no longer relevant. These farms are so much better than ore now because they don't have a respawn timer, so you can consistently get the resource you need. A few PAL changes were made as well, including 2 new farmers and a quality of life chain. The new farmers are Kelpsy and Mud, which farm PAL fluid and high quality PAL oil respectively. The quality of life change is that you can now throw PALs with a negative status into your box, and they will automatically lose that debuff over time. I'll talk more about applying these changes to improve your base's efficiency shortly. But first, let's go through the settings you should use and the type of base you should build for the point you're at in your playthrough. There are 3 types of bases in Palworld, all of which excel in different parts of the game. The 3 types are a farming base, a breeding base, and a hybrid base. Depending on what you find valuable to do during the game, what you decide to build may vary. But I think making a hybrid base, which includes all the aspects you need for very efficient farming, while leaving room for the breeding aspect of the game, is the best course of action for most players. With the best type of base in Palworld established, let's dive into some other things you should consider before starting building. There aren't many options for altering how your bases work in the settings, but there is one setting I would absolutely advise you consider changing if you haven't already. Setting your max base PAL limit to 20 instead of 15. This simply gives you more versatility when it comes to the amount you can really do with your base, and it isn't a game-breaking adjustment. As a player who likes to keep rates fairly difficult to feel rewarded when progressing in the game, I use 20 PALs all the time and I've never felt like it was cheating. It also feels better to actually earn a PAL slot every time you level up the base, because after level 15 in your base's progression without altering settings, this reward wouldn't happen. Another route people go down when making big bases is by using 2 overlapping PAL boxes to make one mega base with 30 to 40 PALs. While double bases are a solid option if planned out properly with all the restrictions they put on that style in mind, I prefer making 2 single box base setups. I do this because while I do build hybrid bases, I like to make my bases specialized in certain tasks. This route also makes pathing PALs far simpler to do consistently and causes less lag. You may be thinking to yourself, what is the most efficient distribution for PALs in a base? Here's what I use for both a 15 and 20 PAL base. For 15, I bring 1 lumberer, 2 miners, 2 transporters, 1 planter, 1 waterer, 3 farmers, 1 gatherer, 2 kindlers, 1 electricity generator, and 1 cooler. I cycle in handy workers or extra kindlers for farmers if I need to complete a certain task, or just use a handy worker or kindler that is already in my party. I also prioritize having 3 farmers because I need as many cakes as possible for the endgame breeding projects I like to work on. For context, I don't have farmers like Clovis in my base. I have so much that I'm never going to need a single piece of wool ever again. If you don't like breeding and don't want to farm cake, I'd replace the farmers with a permanent handy worker, an extra miner, and an extra kindler. For a 20 PAL base that includes the 3 farmers that I mentioned earlier, I'd also include an extra kindler, 2 extra miners, a 3rd transporter, and a handy worker. I'll give more details on the specific PALs that I use for my base later in the video though. With work suitability distribution out of the way, it's time to go over every way Palworld allows you to buff work speed on your PALs. You can buff work speed on a PAL by giving it good traits, condensing it, and using souls on the work speed stat. The best traits to put on your worker PALs are Artisan, Serious, Work Slave, and Lucky. The size increase from Lucky goes away once it's bred down, so it will not affect your pathing. Thanks everyone for commenting this on the last video related to this topic. I appreciate the feedback. Condensing to 4 stars increases the PAL's work skill by 1 tier, which is a substantial upgrade. The first 3 condensations do not improve work speed at all, so if you want to boost speed in any way, it is a massive 116 PAL commitment. Using souls in the Statue of Power is also a great way to boost your PAL's work speed by an extra 30%. A common misconception I see people having is that a PAL's level affects its work speed. This is not the case. The only other ways to speed up worker PALs is by feeding them food like a salad for a temporary buff, or increasing their work effort in the PAL monitoring stand. Increasing work effort in the monitoring stand will make your PALs lose sanity and get debuffs much quicker though. So use this feature in moderation or have backups for your PALs once they get debuffed. Here's how to determine what work level you should put your PALs at. If you just have PALs and are not AFKing at your base, put this on the max speed and just cycle out PALs once they're debuffed. This method takes advantage of the new update, which allows pals to remove their own debuffs when in the box over time. On the contrary, if you use perfectly traded, fully condensed, and soul boosted pals, you should reduce this work effort amount so your one-of-a-kind workers aren't handicapped by debuffs and terrible sanity all the time. You could also just use medicine to heal your pals. It's pretty easy to do once you get to a certain point in progression, and it's pretty efficient. With every method to boost your pal work speed out of the way, let's get into some general base building rules. Making a base that prevents your pals from magically glitching themselves into oblivion while still being efficient is a very challenging and tedious task. Here are some general rules I follow when designing and creating bases to prevent these issues the best I can. When it comes to building multiple layers to a base, or even just putting ceilings anywhere, I try to steer clear. This is because larger sized pals have a tendency to clip through the roof very often and become deadweight in your base. Another important thing to note, even though I'm sure everyone has heard of this before, is not to build your base out of wood. Just make it out of stone. This prevents the base from getting burned to the ground and is extremely easy to make. A lot of people like to just leave the floor there, but placing these foundations prevents pals from glitching into the floor very effectively and prevents rocks from spawning on the floor, so your miners will be able to focus on just the farms. I do recommend placing tall walls around your base as well. This will pretty much prevent any raid threat that could possibly come your way. One last concept that is important for functional bases in Palworld is compartmentalization. Dividing your base's different work ecosystems into their own areas is necessary for any semblance of organization and saves an unholy amount of time. An example of this would be to have a certain area just for mining and lumberers and have chests in that area allocated to just receiving those resources. This will prevent your transporter from carrying heavy stuff across your entire base, getting in the way of other things, and it will just be a lot faster and will prevent lag on your base because stuff will not be laying on the floor. It's very efficient to build in this way, and it's really much easier now that you can sort which items go into which chests. While all these tips are useful in their own right, none of them are going to save your base if it's in a terrible location. Here are some tips when it comes to choosing the spot you should call home. Building your base on a flat surface is a must. It's incredibly important to do this because your pals won't glitch into the floor nearly as often on flat land. And doing this will also make ground pals travel around your base a lot more consistently in general. I noticed that on certain hilly areas, they just cannot move around everywhere as the pathing is very buggy in these cases. There is also the obvious issue of certain structures just not being placeable on sloped land, which is detrimental if you're trying to be efficient with your entire base's radius. A few other factors to keep in mind are that building over the water just isn't allowed. Summoning raid bosses from your main base will absolutely get it destroyed, and building on an elevated surface can definitely prevent raids from reaching you. Just make sure that you really consider closely where you're putting your pal box and the radius of your pal box before you start building your actual base. The base location I use to do all of these things is right here on the map. Pathing for raid pals to the spot is broken, even for flyers like Suzaku's and Van Worm Crusts. There's other flat land with glitched raids, but going into every base location that is amazing inside of this game is its own video. If you want to see a top 10 base locations guide, comment below and I might just make it. Some tips for moving your base if you want to put your base where I put it. I'd recommend bringing a grappling hook because once you're encumbered with all the resources that you're going to be carrying around from your old base, grappling around is so much faster than just doing that slow walk. With all this general information out of the way, this is my distribution of pals for my base. I tend to sleep at night almost every time, so I don't take advantage of nocturnal creatures as much as you might expect. If you do sleep at night every time, replace the Frostallion with Van Worm Crisp for cooling, and replace the Ragnahawks with Van Worm Crisps for better transporting. You could also consider bringing something like a Blaze Howl Noct for kindling at night, and there are other pals in the game that are nocturnal that have really good work suitabilities that I haven't even covered. Notice that I'm also avoiding putting any alphas into my base because they're so large that they screw up pathing very consistently. To clear up any confusion as I scroll through these base pals, my Frostallion is cooling level 5 instead of level 4 because it's fully condensed. Every pal I'm using is the best pal for its given work suitability in the entire game besides Ragnahawk, who is on the same level as other options. Remember, level of skill of a work suitability does mean a lot, but it isn't everything for certain traits. If you watched my previous video on this topic, you'll probably notice that I made a good amount of changes to the list that I did there, but this is my finalized list for what I think the best pals in the game for bases are as of right now. As I'm sure you've noticed while I'm improving my base in the background of this video, it really isn't a precise art. It clearly isn't perfect as I haven't set specific item restrictions for every storage box, and it doesn't look amazingly aesthetic, but it is very efficient. I've also set every production station to transport items automatically besides my weapon and my sphere stations. Almost everything else is completely fine to be thrown in one of my many chests because I don't need it in my inventory anyway. My base produces more than I'll ever need farming wise anyway, so I'm not actually super worried about that last 5%. I guarantee you I could reconfigure this base in 15 different ways and they would all have the exact same output of resources. If you follow every tip I did in this video, you'll have a good enough base to serve you throughout the entire game with no questions asked. I hope you guys found this video useful. If you did, please consider subscribing. If I hit 1,000 subscribers by the end of April, I'll be doing an insane challenge run in May that I know you'll enjoy. Thank you all for watching. This has been Jace, and I'll see you guys next time.